Welcome to Pop Up to Powerhouse, the podcast where side hustles turn pro. Here, we're pulling back the curtain on what it takes to build a standout, profitable brand in the event industry. From pricing with confidence to landing luxury clients, I'm sharing the wins, the setbacks, and everything in between, so you can turn your passion into a powerhouse business. Welcome back to another week of Pop Up to Powerhouse. When I started this series with my pivot story in episode 10, I said that I didn't want to share my story if I wasn't able to share the full journey. And there are parts of that journey that I am really ashamed of, thoughts and feelings that I had during that time. But I also feel like I can't be the only one that has gone through those or have had similar feelings, which is why in today's episode, I want to share what that is with you. During that time when all of this was going on, I was not happy for other business owners, especially people in my own industry, specifically other balloon artists. I was not happy for them at all. And this was during a time where it was like collaboration over competition. And I just did not feel that way. I felt like I was in competition and I was trying to survive and stay alive. So I was not rooting for other businesses. I was not celebrating them. I remember seeing people, post maybe their installs or they launched their business or they're celebrating some big milestone. And I was not clapping for them. And as hard as that is, and I know I know exactly how it sounds. And internally, I hated having those feelings, but that's how I felt. I felt very resentful and I felt really jealous. So if you listen to the previous episode, you would kind of understand a little bit of why I was having these feelings. And I remember at that time also because this is kind of between COVID and now we're into like 2022, 2023, something like that. And I remember watching other businesses either choose to close down or they were forced to close down. And I remember looking at them and thinking, like, see, you're not alone. Like other people are either suffering the way that you're suffering or are having the same issues or problems that you're having. It just felt like I was the only one that was failing. It literally felt like everyone and their mom started a balloon business. And when I started, I guess I was lucky enough that it was really just me and maybe one or two other balloon companies in my area. Like balloons have not taken off the way that they have in these last few years. And it just felt like everyone and their mom started one. And just the whole decor industry in general in events had completely taken off in 2020 because everyone had all this time to launch their businesses. And my feelings weren't completely unwarranted. They were actually true. According to stats from Ablero, in 2019, there was about 3.5 million new business applications filed in the US. In 2020, that jumped to 4.4 million. That was a 24.5% increase. In 2021, it jumped again to 5.4 million applications, another 23.5%, and one of the highest levels ever recorded. So my feelings weren't completely off. I remember feeling like the last few years I had been drug through. I was just in survival mode. Like I had been like kicked and punched and it just felt like I was surviving. And everyone's walking around like super excited that they just started their new businesses. And it wasn't their success that bothered me. It was their excitement because I didn't have that. I missed being excited, that new excitement feeling that you have when you start your business. And I remember desperately trying to get that feeling back and feeling excited for my business again. And I remember like kind of daydreaming about like, do you remember what it felt like in the beginning times? And I did remember, but I just didn't feel that same way. I finally had a realization through a lot of those thoughts that this had nothing to do with anyone else. This really had to do with me. And when I first started out, I wasn't looking at anybody else. I had no idea who the players in the game were. I was just out having fun doing my own thing, and I really missed that, and I was craving that innocence, I guess, again, or that naiveness of not really knowing, um, the industry all that well. Every single industry has competitors, and I was busy throwing myself a pity party. And I finally had this realization that every business, every industry does have competitors. I was just lucky enough to kind of get into the industry before it got so saturated. And I didn't realize actually how much of a blessing that was because I had already created a name for myself. So once I was able to identify those feelings, everything made a little bit more sense. I wasn't envious of the other people. I was just more envious of like their excitement that they had. And I was envious of the excitement that they had with starting their new business, like that every little thing felt like a win and every customer was like such a big deal and every opportunity felt huge. And I had started to take a lot of that for granted. In the beginning, like I said, you didn't know anybody in the industry, right? When you're getting in, you have like these fresh eyes and you have no idea like who the players are in this industry. And once you kind of get into it, you start identifying like who are your referral partners and you start knowing who the people are. And so now you know who's hiring you and who's not, or who's choosing somebody else over you. And sometimes that can be really difficult. And you ask yourself, like, why? Why did somebody choose that person over me? Or you never really knew like who was hiring you and who wasn't. And I've never really been a fan of being benched. And so that was difficult for me to deal with. And at the time, right, I'm dealing with a lot of like stress and anxiety and overwhelm. Everything felt so overwhelming. It was definitely a feeling I've never had in my life ever. And I couldn't quite grapple with why that was. The longer you're in business, the heavier the backpack feels like it gets. They were dreaming about building a business, and I was just trying to keep mine alive. And that created a really dangerous mindset. So, one thing I did learn about myself during that time was one, misery loves company. I think it is such a true statement. I'm not one to sit in discomfort for very long. I was desperately like searching for the answer and how to like get out of this uncomfortable feeling. And so I pushed myself to get out of the house because I knew that secluding myself was not a healthy choice. And so I started getting some of my girlfriends together. Like this was one, and I don't even know if they knew this, but like we had all not gotten together in a long time. And I was like, hey, let's all get together. And I just thought getting out of business, I was trying to really like separate my identity from my business and starting to do things outside of my business and work because for the longest time, that was what I did from like morning to night. It's what I thought about. And so I got all my girlfriends together. We went out to dinner and everyone is just having a conversation. Everyone's kind of talking about, the good and the bad and some of the things that they're all dealing with. And while all of us were dealing with our own issues, I remember sitting back and thinking like, see, you're not alone. Even if our situations were different, like everyone was dealing with some level of shit. Like everyone has their own problems and their own issues. And as horrible as that sounds, I felt some comfort in that night knowing that I wasn't the only one going through something. I knew though that I couldn't stay in this feeling and in this mindset for a long period of time because like I said earlier, I didn't like the way that it made me feel and I really didn't like not cheering other people on. I just felt like that wasn't the type of person that I wanted to be. And so I knew that I had to make some changes and start really working to get myself out of this. Okay, so at this point, I had to identify what I could do to make my situation better. So there were three things that I know that I needed to face. The first one, and likely the most important, was that I needed to separate who I was as a person and my successes from how successful my business was. Like, once I realized that just because my business maybe wasn't doing well, that didn't mean that I wasn't successful. Again, going back to the previous episode, most people don't even start their own business. And that in and of itself is its own feat. And one of my first goals in business was to stay open for more than 5 years because most people don't. And so there were so many things that I had done and achieved that just because I was going through a rough patch didn't mean that I wasn't successful. Uh, I also remember having this feeling that not every year is going to be a great year. You look at any of these large corporations like Meta, Google, Boeing, they lay people off every so often, depending on what's going on with the economy. And that's no different with any other business or any other industry. Like, you're going to have some years that are great and you're going to have some that aren't so great. And once I realized that, like, every year isn't just going to be this like uphill thing, then that one, I knew that it wasn't going to last forever, and it made it easier to kind of to wade through that time and through that storm. So the first part was to separate my identity from my business and how successful it was and what it was doing. The next step is that I knew I needed to create a real plan to pay off my debt. And that even though I didn't feel like paying off my debt was the root issue, I knew that by getting myself in a better financial situation, I would make choices more from maybe a place of abundance or a place of, um, well, what I was hoping was to not be making decisions out of a place of scarcity. And so that was really my goal with paying off the debt was I could be making decisions to move myself forward with where I really actually want to go and the things that I actually want to do if I didn't feel forced to take on jobs that I didn't want to do. And number 3, and arguably for me, probably one of the most important ones is I was too focused at looking in the other lane and watching what other people were doing. And I needed to focus on myself, what I was wanting and where I was wanting to go. And once I had that realization, it made it a lot easier. And some of the things that I started to do was I realized that if you're getting uncomfortable feelings or you don't like some of the people that you're following, guess what? Like, you can unfollow them on social media. Like, you don't have to keep following other people like in your industry or whatever it is. So that was what I started to do until I could get my mindset back into a place um, that wasn't resentful. It that helped me, and then it also decreased how much time I was spending on social media because I think that you can be consuming. If you're consuming, you're not creating. And so that was my goal was to get on social media, do what I needed to do, and get off. I really had to start asking myself, why was somebody else's success bothering me so much? And what I realized was that it was the excitement that they had, and that was something that I wanted and I wasn't feeling. Other people's successes doesn't create insecurity, it actually reveals it. I mean, this is a time when I didn't and I'm probably feel repetitive, but like this was a time when I did not feel excited about anything. And so other people's excitement triggered me. And I was desperately wanting to feel that again. And so that was where these feelings were coming up um, because I wasn't feeling that. And I was trying to figure out how to get that back, but I just wasn't. And there was like, it felt like no amount of positive like thinking would kind of get me back there, but it does eventually. I realized that other people weren't the problem, it was my burnout. And I've been as I've gone through this series, I've really been debating like, can people really feel and tell what I was really going through during that time? Because it's so hard to actually put it into words. But I mean, it felt like I was like scraping. I was the one doing literally everything. I had no boundaries because I was stuck in this scarcity mindset because remember, I was thinking that this was a financial issue, not a burnout issue. And so I was running myself into the ground trying to get out of this financial situation instead of dealing with the burnout. And once I saw that, I started to make a plan to get myself back. So the first one was I started to change my environment. I started attending networking groups to promote my business, get my business out there, but it also was just to like get me out of the house because being an entrepreneur can be very lonely. And a lot of times when you do you get busy doing the work and you're no longer doing the things in the beginning when you weren't as busy, which was like networking and getting out there. Now you're kind of like in the minutia and in the weeds of doing things. And so because things had slowed a little bit, I started joining networking groups again. And I remember realizing that I missed being around people because I had started my career, or prior to starting my business, I worked at a chamber of commerce and I was in charge of a lot of the networking events. And I missed that. Like I loved going to networking events. And as you got busy, uh, you kind of stop doing those things. And so I started to do that again. I met a business coach there, hired him, and I started really diving into personal development. I think one of the best things that I did during this season was that I forced myself to get out there and be around people, even when I didn't want to, because isolation was feeding the story that I was telling myself that I was unsuccessful, that I wasn't doing well, that um, entrepreneurship is hard, I'm not good at it. All of those things you kind of like are thinking in your brain. And if you don't get out of your own brain and get out into the world, you can start believing the thoughts that you're having. So that was the first thing that I thought I did really well. And because again, going back, when you start getting around people, you start realizing that you're not the only one and that other people are going through it. And it just really lightens the load. So that would, if anyone is going through a similar situation, I would just force yourself, as hard as it is, to go to some networking groups or get involved in something because it will feel easier and you'll realize like you're not the only one going through this. Okay, so I also had this realization that talking earlier, like I had to separate my identity from my business, right? Everything I talked about and did was about my business. And I needed to separate that. I needed to have my own identity outside of that. And so I started to look at in what are things that would bring me joy. And at this time, I didn't want to spend any money. So it wasn't like go do and spend all this money, but it was as simple as I love going for walks. So that I started to go for morning walks. I went to school for interior design and I love designing. It's actually probably my favorite part of balloon installations and event design. And but I was no longer really doing that for myself. It was all for clients. And I decided to start kind of doing some of those things. So I started just doing little projects within my house or even just decorating for the holidays. That those were things I got away from because I was so exhausted of decorating for other people. But I realized like it fed me doing that. And a lot of times me working with my hands is actually what turned my brain off. So that was another step that I started to really carve out every single day. I did something, even if it was just for 30 minutes, it was for myself. The next thing I did is I started to dive into personal development. And it's weird now because I feel like it's been a really long time. And I kind of understand now that your life is controlled by your own thoughts. But at the time, I don't think I actually really paid that much attention to that. But I did realize that I needed to start controlling my thoughts and that the story I was telling myself in my head wasn't true and it didn't have to be that way. And so as I dove into personal development and reading books, I mean, I bought books. I was doing Mel Robbins' like high five challenge. I was meditating. So all of these things kind of came together, and I was really just paying attention to what thoughts did I have, and then what is a positive for that. So if I had a negative thought, I then would say, what is one positive of that situation? And that tiny little change, that I think was actually one of the biggest uh, changes or triggers that really changed the trajectory of where I was going. So I paid attention to my thoughts. I started to change the story that I had in my head. The next thing I did was I was feeling, events and many other industries, especially when you work for yourself, you have to create a routine for yourself because to some degree, yes, you can do whatever you want. But if you don't have a routine and you don't have a schedule for the day, then you're really kind of aimlessly running around. And to be honest, I realized like that's kind of why I had done up until then, right? Like I was waiting for things to come to me for me to take action. And so I decided to create a morning routine. It was something I did every morning. I would wake up, I would, for 30 minutes to an hour, I would drink my coffee and I would read a self help book. Then I would go for a walk. It was about 30 minutes. And then I would come back, I would get ready. And before really started my day, I would either do Mel Robbins' High Five Challenge or I would meditate. Um, I would meditate and then I would do her High Five Challenge and then I would start my day. So that was kind of how I started the morning. And then in the evening, I would journal about my day. I wrote down 3 things that I was grateful for every single day. And I just made an Instagram post about this because I think that when you start talking about what you're grateful for, it's in the beginning, or if you don't do it often, it always ends up being like the big things in life, right? Like, I'm grateful for my health and I'm grateful for my family, which those are all great things. But when you do it every single day, you have to get really granular about what you're actually grateful for. So I would do it. And as crazy as this sounds, there were days when I felt like I couldn't even come up with 3 things that I was grateful for, which is so crazy to me to think now. But that was just kind of where my mindset and my brain was. But I started to do that as a practice. I did it every single day. And it came down when you do it daily, it's like, I'm grateful that I have lights. I am grateful I have a warm place to sleep at night. There's just so you start really looking at things that you end up actually taking for granted. And I, at the time, was taking a lot for granted. So I would end my day with journaling and meditating. And then the biggest one is I would make my list of what I needed to do for the next day. So I didn't wake up wondering, like, what should I do today? Like, I already had my list. I knew what I needed to attack and I knew what I needed to go after. And those 2 things created so much more stability in my life in an industry when you don't really know when or where the next job is coming from. So that was super helpful for me. I hope if you're in the event industry, that might be helpful for you as well because there is a lot of uncertainty. Quick pause before we jump back in. If you haven't downloaded my free guide yet, you're seriously missing out. If you're ready to stop undercharging and book those premium clients that you dream about, I made something just for you. It's my free Charge Your Worth guide. Inside, I'll walk you through the exact mindset shifts you're going to need and real strategies to move from side hustle to powerhouse brand. Download it for free at thejamietaylor.com/free guide and take the first step in building the brand and creative business that you deserve. And finally, I knew that I needed to up my balloon game. If there were more people doing balloons, then I knew that I couldn't just continue to do them the way that I had. I had to really figure out what types of balloons I wanted to do, what my look was. And this was when I really went into large scale luxury balloon designs. And I did do that before, but now I was really wanting to show people what was possible. And I kind of started to push my clients towards things I wanted to do. And during this time, kind of goes back to something that I said in the previous episode when people were like, "Oh, you look so busy," or which we did have some of the best installations during this time that I still feel like we've ever had. Some of my most creative installations I felt like came during that time. And looking back now, I feel very blessed, but it wasn't like it just happened. I pushed for that and I had to push my clients to do something completely different. And not every client is looking for things like that, but we had some really good requests that came in and clients that allowed me to kind of do what I wanted to do slowly. And I want to say like ever so slowly. I think that and I know I can only speak for my own experience, but I know what I was looking for was I wanted to get out of this like so quick, like the next day. And it's impossible. Like nothing is going to happen overnight. It happens ever so slowly with little changes and little changes of habits every single day. But I did start to see the shift. I felt like I was finally coming out of this fog that I felt like I had been in. And some really amazing things were starting to unfold. But it wasn't an overnight success or it didn't just happen. Um, I felt like it drug on for years. I started to care less and less what other people were doing, and I started to really focus more on myself. And I might not have been a business that was some overnight viral success, but one thing I did know was I was not someone who was going to give up on myself. And I knew that I was stronger than what I felt like I was facing. I'm hoping my story maybe helps somebody else that was going through this because I know that when I was going through this, listening to other people's stories really did help me. And just know that if you are going through this, there's nothing wrong with you. Um, and that this season won't last forever. Because I do remember feeling like I was never going to come out of this and that this is how life was always going to be. And I realized that, looking back, I don't think I was jealous. I think I was just super burnt out and exhausted. I think I was carrying around so much pressure that I forgot what it felt like to be excited. But I also had a realization that like I created this in a sense, like my decisions and my thoughts to some degree. I've created my life and I knew that I could shift to create a new life if I wanted to. In the next episode, I am finally going to share the exact routines, the mindset shifts, the habits that helped me out of one of the hardest periods of my life and helped me pay off $100,000 worth of debt in 1 year. And finally, I knew that I needed to up my balloon game. If there were more people doing balloons, then I knew that I couldn't just continue to do them the way that I had. I had to really figure out what types of balloons I wanted to do, what my look was. And this was when I really went into large scale luxury balloon designs. And I did do that before, but now I was really wanting to show people what was possible. And I kind of started to push my clients towards things I wanted to do. And during this time, kind of goes back to something that I said in the previous episode when people were like, "Oh, you look so busy," or which we did have some of the best installations during this time that I still feel like we've ever had. Some of my most creative installations I felt like came during that time. And looking back now, I feel very blessed, but it wasn't like it just happened. I pushed for that and I had to push my clients to do something completely different. And not every client is looking for things like that, but we had some really good requests that came in and clients that allowed me to kind of do what I wanted to do slowly. And I want to say like ever so slowly. I think that and I know I can only speak for my own experience, but I know what I was looking for was I wanted to get out of this like so quick, like the next day. And it's impossible. Like nothing is going to happen overnight. It happens ever so slowly with little changes and little changes of habits every single day. But I did start to see the shift. I felt like I was finally coming out of this fog that I felt like I had been in. And some really amazing things were starting to unfold. But it wasn't an overnight success or it didn't just happen. Um, I felt like it drug on for years. I started to care less and less what other people were doing, and I started to really focus more on myself. And I might not have been a business that was some overnight viral success, but one thing I did know was I was not someone who was going to give up on myself. And I knew that I was stronger than what I felt like I was facing. I'm hoping my story maybe helps somebody else that was going through this because I know that when I was going through this, listening to other people's stories really did help me. And just know that if you are going through this, there's nothing wrong with you. Um, and that this season won't last forever, because I do remember feeling like I was never going to come out of this and that this is how life was always going to be. And I realized that, looking back, I don't think I was jealous. I think I was just super burnt out and exhausted. I think I was carrying around so much pressure that I forgot what it felt like to be excited. But I also had a realization that like I created this in a sense, like my decisions and my thoughts to some degree. I've created my life, and I knew that I could shift to create a new life if I wanted to. In the next episode, I am finally going to share the exact routines, the mindset shifts, the habits that helped me out of one of the hardest periods of my life and helped me pay off $100,000 worth of debt in 1 year. Now, a quick ask. I want to keep bringing you these free educational podcasts so that you can build the event business that you want. You can make that possible by simply sharing this episode with your friend, following us on your favorite platform, and leaving us a review. It takes just a moment, and it makes sure that I can keep bringing you the best quality content so that you can go from pop-up to powerhouse.